This video discusses how to troubleshoot a device that won't get on the internet. If you're trying to get online and you can't, it's pretty frustrating. Sometimes you may be using applications that are online or trying to do research, and if you can't get online, it's sort of the end of what you're trying to do. So one of the best things you can know is how to troubleshoot. I will say the first and most important thing to understand is just because you can't get on the internet doesn't mean that everything isn't working, and troubleshooting the differences between those things can often make the difference in getting back online. So one of the first things you might have is you can't get on the internet, you can't print to printers, and you can't get on network devices. And some of the ways that you can troubleshoot that is to see if maybe your device is in airplane mode. Like say you were traveling and you put in airplane mode, completely forgot, you're back at your hotel, you turn on the laptop and now you can't get online. Because you often don't put it in airplane mode, so it's not the first thing that comes to your mind like, oh yeah, of course it's in airplane mode. So the way you can undo that or check is there's three ways actually. You can come here and you can click on the little notification center and you can see if airplane mode is enabled. Here you can see it is clearly not. Another way is to click on the network that you're connected to, and airplane mode is actually accessible from there as well. And those are the easy ways. There's also a third way where you can go to the Windows settings. Let me bring that over here. And then you can click on network and internet and airplane mode and see if that's enabled. So those are three different ways you can check for airplane mode, all of which can be done as you saw in seconds. Another thing could be that the network card is disabled. That doesn't happen very often, but if you're having trouble sometimes or you get the wrong IP address, sometimes it's easier to disable the network card than re-enable it instead of rebooting the computer, which would do the same thing in essence. So the way that you can check that is, again, go back to settings, you click on network and internet, and from here you can see that this is the network you're connected to, and I'm clearly connected as it says this. But if this were to say something different, you could come down and change the adapter options, which is going to bring up this window, which is kind of an old school window that Windows 10 has sort of hidden from you. Back in the day, everything used to be done in here, and it was a lot easier to utilize in my opinion, but now they've sort of combined most things over here into this fluffy little interface, and then you have to figure out where everything is. But that's my personal opinion. From here, this would be grayed out just kind of like these other things over here are. These are other little VPNs and other settings that I've used. So from here you could just right click and say, in this case it would say enable if it were disabled, and it would be grayed out. And then once you did that, it would show up and it'd be color, and then it would connect you to the internet. So that's another possibility that can happen, is your internet connection can get disabled. Last but not least, this is typically for desktops. Most people don't connect a laptop in by using an Ethernet cable unless they're using, the one caveat is unless they're using a dock for that laptop. And then those typically are wired in with an Ethernet cable. The Ethernet cable is going to look very much like an audio phone cable from way back in the day, except for the jack is going to be wider. It's an RJ45 versus an RJ11, so it's just wider, requires more twisted pair. So those are things that you can look for. If you have this plugged, if you are plugged in, make sure that those are seated properly. If the little tabs that you use to pull them out ever get broke, those cables will tend to wiggle out a little bit and make a lesser connection, and you can have problems. So check those, check a cable on both ends. If you have one and that still doesn't help, try a secondary cable. It's possible the cable went bad. Doesn't happen that often, but it can happen. Another thing that can happen is you can print and you can connect to share drives, but you can't get on the internet, which seems really weird, but it's like, hey, I can actually print to the network server, not something that's plugged in with USB, because that doesn't really tell you anything, but something that's a network printer. You're connecting with IP printing, you're not physically connected to it. That's going to be a network printer. If you can print to that, and you can also, and or you can get on map drives if they're available to you, or connect to other computers on your network, but you can't get on the internet, you probably have an internet outage. So what that means is the service from your ISP, whoever that may be, probably went down. They might have done updates or something happened. There was an outage, maybe bad weather. There's so many things that can take that down. And typically your devices are set to automatically renew that connection once it's restored. Doesn't always happen. It's meant to, but you know, nothing's 100%. So the first thing you can do is try restarting that. Just give it a reboot before you even bother calling them. A lot of times that'll fix the issue and you're already fixed and you didn't waste 20 minutes on phone trees. If it doesn't work, make the call. Tell them that you're out. They might not know. It might just be isolated to you. That piece of equipment from them, that cable or ISP modem could be bad. So many things could happen. So try rebooting first. If that doesn't work, give them a call. So basically, the signal could be down, like I just discussed. The cable modem could be off or jammed. So the other thing that can happen is power outages. If you have a power outage or you have a fluctuation in power and that device isn't protected by surge protection, you potentially could have a bad device, and or it just got turned off and didn't turn back on. So if it's off, turn it on. That may fix your problem right away. Last but not least, in a larger network or some place where they have more devices than say 6 to 10, you probably have a firewall, an additional firewall, or switches that connect all the devices that make up your network together. If one of those gets jammed or gets turned off or has a equipment failure, all the devices that are plugged into it are not going to be able to be seen by all the other devices, nor will they be able to connect to other devices because there's no communication any longer. It's like a one-way communication at that point. So that could be something that's also an issue. So usually try with a reboot. That fixes a lot of things. If that doesn't work, then you're going to have to investigate a little further into the equipment. Another thing that you can have happen is that you can get on the internet. That's kind of the opposite of the last problem, but you can't print to network printers and you can't get on share drives. So that's kind of an odd problem. People often find that very curious because they're like, why get on the internet? Why can't I print? Well, there's two huge causes for that. One is that you're connected to the wrong wireless network. So the way that you check that is by clicking on your network, and I'm not on wireless here, I'm actually wired in, but there are, if I were on wireless, I would see all the wireless networks, and depending upon what kind of an office or home that you live in, the amount of wireless networks that surround you are probably enormous. It's very easy to get connected to the wrong network if you've ever accidentally clicked on something and say it was open without passwords, and that could be in your history. And or if you work at a business where you have business internet and then there's a guest wireless as well. The guest wireless is usually wide open access, the idea being that say you have people sitting in a dental office or a doctor's office and you want to provide internet for people so that they can get on the Wi-Fi and not use their own data as they're sitting in there waiting for their appointments. It's very common. It's very easy for a business device to also accidentally end up on that guest wireless. So if you check, you poke, you check, and you're on the wrong one, just make the change and you'll automatically get access back to the internet, and you should be able to get access to the printer and your map drives again. If you can't, you can always do a reboot and or do that disable your network card like we just talked about a minute ago, re-enable. It's going to get the correct IP address that way. The other thing that can happen is, once again, a secondary switch, just like we talked about down here. If there's a secondary switch that has some devices in the office and not others, if those get jammed up, sometimes you can connect internally, but you can't to some devices depending upon if they're on the same switch as you, but then not others. So it's possible that you may need to reboot a switch. Usually if the cabling is labeled, you can track down which switch you're connected to that's not working and then just reboot the one. If you don't have time for that or you don't know, just reboot both of them. Try doing it like when people are on a lunch break so you don't interrupt everybody. Usually that can be done in a couple minutes time. And then that way you should be able to get back online. And one of the other things that can happen is that you can connect to the wired or wireless network, but you can't get on the internet. So you're connected. You can come over here and see you're connected to that wireless, whatever it may be, but yet you still can't get on the internet. Doesn't make any sense. I'm connected. Well, the interesting thing about this is that being connected to a wired or wireless network does not guarantee you get on the internet. It just means you've connected to that network. In essence, a network is always going to broadcast itself, so this is more appropriate for the wireless piece of it, but a wired network kind of is similar. If the wired internet connection is there, you're going to connect to it. Your device connects every time. Mine does too. A wireless network is the same way. It's being broadcast out. It's broadcasting an SSID that you've connected to. That's the name of that wireless that you see and you know. And it provides you with internet access as long as the ISP has a signal and your hardware is all working fine and there's no problems. So being connected to a network doesn't equate getting on the internet. Those two pieces are often confused for the same thing, but they're technically different. So what can happen is you're connected and it seems like everything's fine, but really what's happening is everything's fine on your device, but in the background, something's happened either with the ISP or with another piece of equipment. That's typically always going to be the cause when you're connected to the wired or wireless network and yet you still can't get on the internet. So what happens is, the cable, either like the cable box went down, or the modem, or it got jammed, or the internet's actually down from your service provider, or a switch or a firewall got jammed up. Those are kind of all the same as if you can print and you can't get connected, but you can't get on the network. So it's kind of similar to these things we talked about with this example here. This is going to be very much the same thing. You're connected and it seems like you've done everything right and everything's working, and you have, except for the actual internet isn't getting to you. And that's because either maybe the signal's down or some other piece of equipment's having issues. Most of the time a reboot will fix that. It isn't always the case because equipment does eventually go bad and fail usually. You can't keep some, you're not going to be able to keep a switch for 45 years and have it still work. Eventually those things will need to be replaced. Not as often as many other things, but there's power supplies that can go bad. There's lots of things that can go wrong. So try checking out those. If you don't know what those are, then hopefully you have IT staff that can help you do that. But just knowing that will help narrow down, if you do have an IT staff and you work for a large company, if you call them up and say, I can't get on the internet, or you call them up and say, hey, I can get to all my map drives and I can print, but I can't get on the internet, you're going to get a very different response to them. It's going to be quicker. They're going to be able to help you faster because you're more familiar with what your actual problem is. And by the way you describe it to them, you will save them time and help them narrow down what's actually causing it and help them get you help faster. So knowing a little bit about how to help yourself when you can't get on the internet, and or other resources, because there's other resources that require you to be able to get network connectivity, will help you troubleshoot kind of yourself, and sometimes you won't even need somebody else. And the great thing is then you're back online before you know it. So this post was basically about how to troubleshoot a device that won't get on the internet, some of the different issues you can experience, and also what may be causing those.